This is Gerardo Del Real with Small Cap Stock Digest. Joining me today is the managing editor for Outsider Club, investment director of the personal finance advisory, The Crow's Nest, and cannabis stocks advisory, the Marijuana Manifesto, Mr. Jimmy Mengel. Jimmy, how's it going?
Thanks, Gerardo. That was a wonderful introduction.
Hopefully it was accurate. Listen, you and I haven't had the opportunity to speak on the record since late July. A lot going on in the cannabis space, a lot to get to. I'd love to start by getting your overall take on what you see as the big difference between late July and now and everything that's transpired. And then let's get into some specifics here in a bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's a wild ride, as it has always been. I'd like to say I'm not surprised, but I continue to be surprised every day I try to cover this stuff. So I guess the big news this year was Canada legalizing marijuana and that coming into play.
Absolutely.
So it so happens that I was in Vancouver the day that marijuana was legalized in Canada, which I thought would be a huge celebration, like this big, breakthrough. That didn't appear to be the case.
Huh.
So where we were in Vancouver, you could not buy marijuana anywhere. There was one or two shops like hours away. So I think due to a lot of the regulations in Canada and how hard it is to actually sell the product, even though it's legal, it kind of landed with a thud, and I think that reflected in stock prices. So you would think marijuana goes legal, and then you're off to the races, but it's still caught up in that government bureaucracy, which I think led a lot of the big players to take a little bit of their money out, and the prices have reflected as such.
Anytime there's a mega trend, Jimmy, there's going to be volatility. I think anybody that dabbles in the space is comfortable in acknowledging that there's going to be wild rides up and wild rides down. The one constant, and this is something that we've seen with all mega trends, is the surge of big business getting into that trend and trying to capitalize off of it. The cannabis space is no exception. There's been a recent surge of big business getting into cannabis and wanting to get into it. Can you talk a bit about that and just kind of how you see that developing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will be the next big driver for the market. We saw it last year with Constellation throwing down a ton of money to Canopy Growth, and their stock went crazy as a result of that. So I think you're going to see a lot of old style businesses finally coming to Jesus here and recognizing that marijuana is such a huge trend that it can't be ignored. So beverages are a big thing. Big pharma is going to be a major thing. And I think one of the sectors people aren't really talking about is big tobacco. Because as you well know, people are smoking less and less cigarettes every year.
Absolutely.
I think it's down, 5 to 10% a year. So they have to fill that up with something else, because people still want to smoke something.
Absolutely. And no pun intended, but it's a natural hedge for the tobacco companies, right?
Absolutely. They really need to come up with new businesses. And I think if you look at the marijuana market versus the tobacco market, they would big companies like Altria would be crazy not to be jumping into this. And I've joked about it before, but even 5-6 years ago, I said there's going to be a Marlboro Green coming to the market, before you know it, and they should do very well with that kind of consolidation and buying up some of these assets.
Do you think the Marlboro man will lose the rope and the hat if it's Marlboro Green?
Well, maybe it'll be a hemp rope.
There you go. There you go. So getting serious again for a minute here, Jimmy. You were on the campaign trail this summer, if I understand that correctly. It's a perfect segue to get into the politics shifting here in the U.S. Tell us about your experience, and let's talk politics and the shift here in the United States in regards to cannabis.
Well, I think it's been very interesting. Just very briefly, I was on the campaign trail with Gary Johnson, who was one of the first governors in the country to recognize that marijuana is not only a medicine, but as a libertarian, something people should have the right to do, regardless. It brings jobs, it brings tax dollars, it doesn't really hurt anyone. So spending a few days with him was pretty enlightening because he basically risked his political capital on legalizing marijuana when it was not a popular thing in the late 90s. So it's interesting to see that play out in Senate campaigns. It's now playing out nationally with political campaigns. And there's very few people that are fighting against legalization of marijuana. It's not politically popular anymore. So that is flipped. What I do think is interesting is, for one, our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, or our previous Attorney General, has been kicked out. And he was really the biggest impediment to legalizing marijuana because he's always been against marijuana. So I'm interested to see who Donald Trump will name as his new Attorney General. And if that is the case, and it's someone that's more open to marijuana legalization, then I would say we're in a very to start legalizing a lot more countries in the or a lot more counties and states, and then pretty much being off to the races in terms of legalization in the United States across the board.
What do you think, Jimmy, are going to be the key markets that open up? Let's assume that you're correct, and I believe you are, in regards to legalization and decriminalization here in the U.S. If that becomes the status quo, what are going to be the main markets that are opening up?
So the one I'm really looking at is New Jersey, and they've been on the cusp for a while. And it actually feeds into some of the Attorney General talk because Chris Christie was in charge for quite a while, and he was very anti-marijuana.
Yes, he was.
So he's also on the short list for Attorney General. So I'm a little bit worried. So if Chris Christie is named Attorney General, that could really just put us right back in the Jeff Sessions position.
Right.
However, New Jersey itself looks like it is totally on track to legalize recreational marijuana. And I think New Jersey is a very interesting state because not only do you have New Jersey, which is large enough, but that would be the feeder to New York, and then you're seeing the dominoes fall. So if New Jersey can legalize marijuana by next year, and they have a very interesting gubernatorial candidate that is going to, it is said openly he's going to do that. I think you see New Jersey go, and then I think New York is not far behind, and then after that, I mean, those are the big guys. So you have billions of dollars flowing into those areas, and that should legitimize the industry. Obviously, that's where Wall Street is, and that's another conversation as well.
And these are states that need the tax revenue, right? I mean, a lot of this isn't motivated by government wanting to honor people's individual rights. A lot of this is motivated by the fact that these states are broke and need the tax revenue, correct?
Yeah, no, I think so, and it's interesting to see people's rationales for these things. But when you start talking about tax revenue, you start talking about American jobs. It's hard to argue. Historically, it's been a Republican issue where, it's a moral thing. We can't have marijuana being legal. But now that the money is flowing in, it's been a totally different story. So it's a politically popular opinion now. And they're like, okay, well, we can bring in American jobs. We can bring in, as far as California goes, almost $1 billion in tax revenue a year. And then it's a much easier pitch to make to your more conservative base. And nothing has been more interesting than former Speaker John Boehner joining the board of Acreage Holdings and now going out and pitching marijuana when he was, said in the past that it was a scourge and he would never support that kind of thing. But I think when it comes down to it, the money talks, and he realizes, hey, I can make a ton of money in this industry. People are coming around to it, and it's not a political third rail like it used to be.
Well, there's also the other side about the amount of resources that can be allocated elsewhere, right? I mean, this frees up police departments to go fight real crime, look for rapists and murderers and thieves, as opposed to trying to incarcerate and the toll that takes on both government and the people they're incarcerating for, a gram of marijuana. Would you agree with that, Jimmy?
Oh, yeah. It's basically the prison industrial complex. And we've been putting people in jail for far too long for minor drug charges. And it's a good anecdote here is I have a company that I watch that they've taken prisoners who are incarcerated for marijuana charges, low-level drug charges, and now as part of their rehabilitation, they've set up factories where these people can come out, use their, I guess you would say, their expertise in the industry, and they teach them how to farm and how to grow marijuana.
Insane.
Which is, painfully ironic.
Yeah.
Just like, why are we locking people up, paying for this, and ruining lives when we could just turn them into entrepreneurs? And I think if you look at the numbers, it's outrageous how many people are in prison for minor drug charges, and I think that is a major issue with this entire thing, where you need to have people out of jail working high-paying American jobs, and we all benefit.
Couldn't agree more, Jimmy. The last time we spoke, we talked about the volatility. We also asked for the speculator that's looking from the outside in whether or not they had missed the boat on marijuana stocks. A lot of people say it's a deflated bubble. Where do you see it moving forward? Are there still opportunities to make money in the space, and what should people be looking for?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I get it all the time. So a little background on me, like I had my readers invest in Canopy Growth, which is now like the biggest marijuana company in the world, at around $1.60, and now it's trading in the 30s. So I think that initial boat of outrageous, 10,000% gains, that may not be as likely. But I think, like, based on what we talked about with the United States, for instance, entirely new markets opening up every single day. So you really need to look at, places like Michigan that just opened up for recreational use, or places like Florida who are really growing their medical marijuana, or Arizona. You start looking into new markets, and if a business exists before and then all of a sudden they're able to just blow it open, I think you'll see similar gains. So I don't think it's at all too late to invest in marijuana. I think it's probably going to be more interesting as the years go by, and you have more states opening up, and you also have more international exportation. So a lot of these companies are very, very shrewd at growing marijuana, especially some of the Canadian companies. So they know how to do it, they have a process, and then they go to some place like Germany who does not have a process at all, and they're able to export, get licenses, and then all of a sudden you're selling, millions of dollars in Germany or through the rest of Europe. And you're going to see plenty of places to sell marijuana.
Fantastic. Jimmy, it's fascinating as always. How can people get a hold of you if they want to vet your work and want to see what you're about?
Yeah, you can go to outsiderclub.com. I write about marijuana pretty frequently. I also run a newsletter called the Marijuana Manifesto that focuses on this every single week. And it also kind of targets some of the smaller companies, like what you're talking about. If you want to see like those big old marijuana gains, you got to look at the small guys that may be bought up by the bigger guys. So I deal with that a lot. And then I also run a advisory called the Crow's Nest, where I kind of started this entire marijuana thing, 5 years ago with Canopy Growth and a few other companies. So yeah, go to outsiderclub.com and you can get all sorts of resources for marijuana investing.
You're a busy man, Jimmy. Thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, always a pleasure, Gerardo.